It's your birthday,
Yep.
and this gives us an opportunity to go back in time and start from the beginning and have a little bit of a documentary about your life. So without saying a whole lot, and before Dad comes back up in here and it disturbs us, why don't you tell us about your where you were born, or your name and the year and the date and all that significant information from when it began.
All right. I was born on August the 22nd of 1930,
All right.
and I was born in near Laurinburg, North Carolina. My parents already had 5 sons and 4 daughters when I was born. And then I have one younger sister named Margaret, who's 2 years younger than me.
So the boys were born first, so you had 5 older brothers and basically, what, 3 older sisters?
My brothers are Frank, who is now deceased, Louis, James, Charlie, and Archie. That's from the oldest to the youngest.
All right.
Then I have 2 deceased sisters, Annie Mae and Viola. And then I grew up with my sister Louise, who is now deceased, and my sister Grace, who's 2 years older than me. And then I have a sister Margaret, who's 2 years younger than me.
So that was a fairly large family, but from what you tell us, that
Yeah, there was 11
you
children.
basically had nieces and nephews that probably as older, maybe even older than you were, because of like your
Well,
older brother, maybe Frank, had children and already maybe were born before you were born, or not quite.
No, I'm older than most of my nieces and nephews. I can't think of any of them that's older than me.
Okay. So you were born in Laurinburg, so
Yeah.
how did you get to Columbia, I guess, is what we want to get to. It was 1930 you were born.
That was in 1930.
So what happened then?
Well, my parents lived in North Carolina and in South Carolina alternately wherever they could find work. And as far as my lifetime is concerned, they worked in the cotton mills, both my father and my mother. And there was a time when we children were real small that Dad worked the 2nd shift and my mama worked the 3rd shift, so that my father would be coming home about the time that my mama left to go to work. And oftentimes my mother couldn't drive or didn't drive. And so oftentimes sisters Margaret and Grace and I would walk Mama to the bus line for her to catch the bus to go to work and walk back, because that would be at about 10:30 at night.
I see.
And we lived on what's called Rose Hill, which is off Rosewood Drive. And it was a real nice community. Everybody knew everybody, and everybody helped everybody. And often, if you had, say, something out of your garden, somebody would trade you something that they had that you would like to have, some kind of foodstuffs or something like that, in return for something out of your garden. So it was not at all unusual for the neighbors to share whatever they had, and in turn you shared to some extent whatever you had. And so it was real, you knew everybody on your street. It was not anything unusual, even as a child, for me to walk up Fulton Street all by myself, knowing that I was absolutely safe. There wasn't a neighbor on that street who would not have protected me if I needed protection. And you don't have that kind of world now.
No.
And my younger sister Margaret and I were, I would say, the closest at that point. I do have a sister Grace who's 2 years older than me, but both Margaret and I loved music, and my parents in getting a man named Mr. Granger to come and give us piano lessons, would give him vegetables out of our garden.
Oh,
Because they didn't have money to pay, but they could give him stuff out of the garden, which he was glad to get. And he was the one that would come into our house and teach us the notes on the piano. Let's see, what else do I need to talk? And
was there any significance? Was there any particular person you were named after, or was there anything that your parents may have?
I really don't know. My name is Evelyn Hazel, and I have no idea when Mama came up with those names.
Okay.
She's never, if it was something special, she certainly never told me. But with that many children, you just pretty well take whatever you can. But my parents had worked in the mills, and often the mills would go on strike, and those were really tough times because you had no income coming in. And so that was another reason why I paid for you to have, your own garden so that you could just exist. And oftentimes, as I say, trade something out of your garden for something, some meat or something.
But that was very common then, right?
Yeah, that was common. Cotton mills on a fairly regular basis would have a strike. But my parents were very religious. My father served as like a janitor at the Church of God, which is down on South Main Street. And my very earliest memory is waking up. I must have been 3 or 4 years old, waking up in a dark place, no lights. And I had just woke up and had begun crying when the lights got turned on and my father came running, and Mama was right behind him. But my dad was like the janitor of the church at that time. And he was, doing all the necessary things, and thought that, I'd already gotten in the car. Somebody had already gotten me into the car.
Oh, okay.
And I had gone to sleep beside of him and was lying on the bench asleep. And they forgot until they checked everybody in the car, and I wasn't there. And then they came back in and got me. But that's my earliest memory, is waking up in a darkened church all by myself.
Where was that church located?
It's on South Main Street. It's still there, right across from that
That'd be
mill
the
there.
Church of God.
It was a Church of God.
Okay, and it's still a Church of God.
No,
Or is it
I'm
something
not
else?
sure what it is now, but
Okay.
no, it's not a church at all now.
Okay.
But that's my earliest memory, as far as actual memory.
And how old do you think you were?
I would say I was probably around 3 or 4.
Okay.
Something like that. But Mom and Dad, Mama would take in washing or do sewing or something to make extra money. When you got a family, you have to do whatever you can do, okay? And then, of course, my brothers started getting married and moving away and having their own families. And so we had to walk to school. We went to Rosewood School, and we had to walk from Fulton Street up to Rosewood School. But it was usually a gang of us, my sisters, and then quite a few other students that had to walk, so we all kind of walked along together and watched out for each other. But I loved school. I could hardly wait to go to school, and I loved it. And I really wish I could have gone and got a college degree. And I tried it, but that with a family and a job, it just didn't work out. But my first grade teacher was a very kind person, and her name was Miss Black. My second grade teacher was a lady named Chris Willis, who was a spinster, had never been married. She had the most striking green eyes that you've ever seen. And she was an excellent teacher, but she was a very strict person. And so you didn't laugh or talk or anything when she was conducting her class. And that was a particularly bad time for our family. Maybe the mills were on strike or something. Anyway, she learned that I was going to school. She probably saw me hobbling because I'd gotten a splinter into my heel, into the bottom of my foot at the heel. And my daddy had tried to cut it out with his pocket knife, and it had gotten infected. And so I was hobbling but still going to school. And so she put me in her car and brought me home, and went out and bought some white socks for me to wear so I wouldn't get infected, and told my mama that, you know, that she would see to it that nothing was held against me if Mama needed to keep me home for a day or two till that could heal up. And later in my life, I came across Chris Willis again when I was in the Pilot Club.
Oh, yeah.
And she still was more or less the same personality, but it was just great for us to be reunited. And I thanked her again for
She
her
probably
being
had
so
a
kind.
significant effect on your life, I
She
guess.
did.
Apparently, she made a real positive
She
impression
did.
on
She
you.
did.
And then to sit here thinking about it, isn't it kind of odd that you two of your own daughters end up being a school teacher?
It
you know,
is.
So,
Truly.
so maybe that was kind of, in a roundabout way passed on down.
That's right. And she was an excellent teacher. But I loved school. I enjoyed going to school. And I enjoyed learning. I enjoyed studying. You know, books have always been my number one choice of anything as far as pleasure. And I think that's very evident. If anybody can see our house now, I must have probably 1,000 books around here.
Hazel Cauley Library.
But anyway, and then I went on up and through and graduated from Rosewood, and so then you couldn't go to the city schools because Rosewood Drive was the dividing line between the City of Columbia schools and other schools, and we were on the other side of Rosewood Drive. So that meant we had to go to Olympia School, which is a good distance from the house where we were. And so we would walk to school, and no matter what the weather, you know, rain, sleet, snow, whatever. And one of the things that I remember, and I can't place the time, was it was a day and it had been sleeting and snowing and just generally bad weather, and we had a lot of steps off of one of our porches, and we were going to go down those steps, and they had ice accumulated on them, and I had my book sack, and as I put my foot on the top step, it slipped, and I bounced onto every one of those steps, every one of them. And right behind me, on the step behind me, was my bag, my book bag, bouncing on the step behind me. And by the time I got to the bottom, of course, I was wet, you know, from all that. But I went on to school anyway. I would not have missed school for anything.
Well, one of the things you had said before was, I'm not sure if I'm stating this correctly, when you went to Olympia, the last year that you were required to attend in the high school was 11th grade, and did not have a 12th grade. Did you tell me that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's
so,
true.
But did you also tell me your class was the last 11th grade class, and the next year they had 12?
That's true.
Okay, I should make sure that that's what I remember.
That's right. And I graduated in 1947.
Okay. Now, one story, I don't want you to jump too far here. One story you told us, and I'd like for you maybe to go back and maybe tell a little detail, is about your brother Archie coming home from the war.
Yeah, I was in my early teens, and I got a job working after school in a grocery store on Rosewood Drive. At that time, I think it was called Eden's.
Is that what the Piggly Wiggly is at now? Or is that different?
Yeah, it's about where the Piggly Wiggly is
Okay.
now.
All
And so I didn't go home after school. I went straight there and worked until the store closed. And then I went home. And so my brother Archie had been away during the war. And of course we were very concerned about his safety. And he went to Germany. And he would send things back, of course letters. And he sent me a Bible, a German Bible, which is called Mein Kampf.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry to say that in the different places that we've moved in the interim, somehow or another that's gotten misplaced. I sure am sorry, because I did treasure it. But he said that to me, and it was a real treasure. And so I was working that afternoon, and we didn't know, we knew Archie was probably going to be coming home, but we didn't know when. So I was looking out the window, and here was this little small soldier with a big duffel bag on his back. It was almost as big as he was. And it took me a second to realize who it was, and it was my brother Archie. And of course, I wasn't supposed to leave the store, but I left the store no matter what, you know. And I just was so thrilled to see him. And he came home, and
Did y'all have a coming home party for him?
well,
Get together dinner or?
yeah, we just got the family, as many of the family together as we could. And he didn't stay in South Carolina too long. He had a buddy in the Army that was in love with a girl from Missouri who had a sister.
Married sisters, I remember
Yeah.
this.
And so my brother Archie married Rita Brockman, and his buddy married Rita's
And
sister.
still is in
And
Missouri.
yeah, they still married, and still in Missouri, and got several children, 3 I think, and they're all grown. Let's see.
Was Archie the only one that was in the service, or?
Yeah,
Okay, I wasn't real sure about
because all my brothers, other than that, already was married and had
Children.
families, and so the draft was like, you know, they started out with single people, and then, you know, if you had a number of children, you didn't have to go at first. If it went on for a while, I'm sure they'd have kept calling on more men with children.
that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. My brother Troy, at one time worked here. He was married to a lady named Grace, and she worked for the telephone company. And he worked for a car dealership to repair cars. They had a son named Randy.
Mm-hmm.
And they lived near where the baseball field is now. What's the name of that
Capital
baseball?
City Park?
Yeah, Capital City
off of-
Park, down that little street right
Yeah.
there. And so there was about a 2-hour leeway between the time Grace had to leave to go to work at the telephone company and the time when Troy would get back. So I would walk from my house up on the top of Rosewood Hill
Oh,
to
that-
that place
That's a long walk.
to babysit Randy, and then walk back.
Oh.
And the other thing that stands out in my mind is in school you had to, in home ec, you had to make something, a piece of clothing. And I made a skirt, and I had it, the deadline was coming, and I had it finished except for finishing the hem. So I took it home to finish the hem. And when I got to school the next day, I had forgotten to bring the skirt. And that was an absolute requirement. So I was either going to fail that course, or I was going to walk home and get that skirt and bring the skirt back. And I did that and passed the course.
So that brings you up to your teenage years. I guess we're gonna get to the fun part here when you met Dad.
All right.
So if you want to, you can tie that in. We probably have another 10 or 12 minutes left. But,
Okay. Well, as I say, we went to church often, and I had met Winford's older brother, Edward. And, you know, we sort of were friends. And he told me that his younger brother was going to be coming. And so then on a Wednesday night, if I recall correctly, Aunt Ruby and Aunt Jessie were there, and they had Winford there with them. And so I had some girlfriends, Mildred Poe and Elizabeth Farr, and so we had kind of a bet who was going to get the first date with Winford.
was he a hottie back then?
It was just, you know, a fun game.
Yeah.
And of course I won. And nobody else stood a chance because I was determined I was going to win that one. But anyway, to make a long story short, we fell in
So
love.
the first time you ever saw him was at church.
It was at church.
And you're saying that Aunt Ruby and Aunt Jessie was also going to church?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
And Uncle Larry.
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
Part of God's plan.
yeah. And so anyway, so we started, I guess you'd call it dating. It wasn't, dates as some people consider it, but he would walk us home and with us and come to the house. And so then we decided we would get married. I just graduated from high school. And let's see, I think I graduated about the 12th, and I got married on June the 28th. And so then Aunt Ruby was living on Gaston Street, close to the governor's mansion. The house has been torn down now, and it was split up. The house was split up where it could be apartments.
Mm-hmm.
So she let us live in an apartment in her house, and so that's where we got married. Was in the parlor of that house. John Davis was the minister who married us, and we went to Georgia, which is where Winfred's from, on our honeymoon. And while we were there, a bunch of us went swimming, which I can't swim, and I nearly drowned, and your dad held his breath so long hunting for me in that mill pond until his nose just gushed blood. I mean, just everywhere when he finally got me out. And my chest would rattle when I would breathe. So I thank God for sparing my life then.
So y'all were swimming in basically like a little
just old pond.
pond.
Out of,
And
just old pond.
you had gotten the water deeper, or you fell in, or you swimming?
No, I was out there, on my feet, and then I
Yeah.
lost my footing, and I went under the water, and I simply could not get out. I could not come back up. So Winfred held his breath so long, hunting for me in that pond, till when he got me out, his nose just, just
Wow.
blood everywhere. So that was, really something to remember. So anyway, over the years, we were able to do a little bit more. In each case, God would open up a door for me through some contact for us, for our family. As far as houses are concerned, in every case where we've gotten a better house, it was because of some contact involving, the clients where I worked. And I loved legal work. I'm glad God let me be a part of that too. I enjoyed it, and if I do say so, I was good at it. And I would even look up cases.
Apparently you were good because you were the Secretary of the Year with 1965.
Yeah, legal secretary of the year.
Yes.
But, there were times when I thought, oh my goodness, if I could just be, in a different situation, I'd go to law school and I'd be a lawyer, because I think I would have been a good one. And I was all the time looking up cases and telling my bosses about cases that I had seen or read that would help a case that they were actually, involved in. And anyways, and so I started out, well, I don't know how much detail you want, but anyway, I started out at one lawyer's office, and my check from him was supplemented by a check from the state because he was an assistant attorney general. And so the state employees got a raise, which meant I got a slight raise. And he wanted to subtract the same amount of my raise from what he was paying me, which I thought was terrible, because that was like putting my raise in his pocket. And I tried to tell him, that just was not right. And so anyway, I wound up just saying, I can't work for anybody that would do that. I said, that's like stealing out of my pocket. And so I walked down to the sidewalk and was going to go back to my car. And I ran into this lawyer whose name was Mr. Singletary, who I'd gotten acquainted with. He said, Miss C, what you doing on the sidewalk this time of the day? That's what he called me. And I said, well, I just quit my job. And I said, I'm going to have to go hunt me another one. He said, is that right? He said, I know somebody who needs a good secretary. And so I went and got a job in the same building on the 10th floor for other lawyers that I stayed there 8.5 years.
How about that?
And was very happy there. And they paid me well and took advantage of, my interest in the law. And I learned so much. I really did. And they were very kind to me, gave me bonuses. And anyway, I don't know. I could go on forever about my work history. But
What about more things about the family, about the children coming along, Kathy and myself and all? I guess in a general statement or whatever, because as we have, like you said, be able to have a situation where we can move to a bigger or larger home, and so like every time a child came along, we made another move because family got bigger and bigger. But what's some of the things that you'd like to pass on about your family or anything in general to your grandchildren or great-grandchildren or anybody else that'd like to see this tape that you would like to pass on to them?
Well, partly in connection with that, I look back and I see where at every turn God was there, because we were very poor. And I got pregnant not long after we'd gotten married. And we were living in a little small, 3-room, not completed house on top of a hill on Oakland Avenue in College Place. It did not have inside heating or cooling or anything. You had a heater, which was run by kerosene. And one night it got so cold that the kerosene froze, literally froze. And so that is where we were living when Kathy was born. And, we really didn't have any money. I wasn't working at that time. And so then I'd gotten up, and before I should have probably, and was doing too much, washing clothes and stuff like that. And I was there, just me and Kathy, and she was just an infant. And I started hemorrhaging, and it kept getting worse and worse. And it was extremely cold. All the neighbors, there was a vacant lot beside us. And so I finally knew I had to have some help. And I didn't have a phone. And so I went to the back door, and I screamed, Mrs. Moore, who was my neighbor, with a vacant lot between us. This is dead winter.
Wow.
And then when I did that, and I was feeling faint, and I started to faint, and I saw her. She was saying, "My God, child, what has happened to you?" I had fell and hit my head on the refrigerator, and she was coming up my steps, and she said, "My God, what has happened to you?" And I said, "Help me to the bed," because I was hemorrhaging some.
But you were supposed to have been resting and laying down. You did too much. Right?
That's right. And but I'd even been up washing clothes because there was nobody else there to wash them. And so anyway, I said, call my mama. And then I passed out. And so she went back to her house and called my parents. And they came flying out there in their old car up the driveway and all. And so they called the doctor, and the doctor, we didn't have any money really to go anywhere to the doctor. But the doctor said to elevate, my body where my head was lower than the rest of my body. That's what they told. So that's what happened, and ultimately, the hemorrhaging ceased. That was a very scary time.
Who helped you with Kathy during that period of time?
Well, that's just it. There was nobody but just me and Kathy. And if Mrs. Moore had not heard me, God knows what would have happened, because I'm convinced I would have just bled to death.
So in a short period of time, your marriage, you almost drowned, you almost bled to death. So.
But God's been there.
That's right.
You could see where He was there along the way. Because it's a miracle for Mrs. Moore to have heard me. It was a very cold day, and all the doors and windows are shut. But anyway, when I kind of came to and raised my head up off the floor, I saw her coming up the steps, and she said, "My God, child, what's happened to you?" And I said, "Help me up and let me run." And I ran to the bed. Because I knew I wasn't going to make it if I didn't hurry up and get to the bed. And I said, "Call my mama." And so it wasn't long before they came flying up there. And so anyway, they fixed it where my head was lower than the rest of my body. Okay, we're running out of time.
Yeah, I think we're out of time. That's
Oh,
fine.
dear.
That's fine. That was great. See, I tell you, that 30 minutes goes by quick, don't it? Well, that's fine. That's great. It says 0. I tell you what, it's still recording, so you're probably going to have to be quick about is there any statement or anything you'd like to pass on?
Well,
If you could condense everything into a statement or saying or
I would
advice or whatever.
I would like to say that all the credit goes to God
Amen.
for all the blessings that I and my family have had. He's always been there for us. He has opened the way for us to get one house after the other.